Let's talk about books. What have I been reading this July? And of course, I want to hear what you've been reading as well. So leave me a comment or come over on Instagram. Tell me what you've been reading. But in the meantime, welcome to the book club. This is what I'm reading in July. Hello and welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 218 with me, Swiger. Here we talk about what it's like to run a handmade business, the profitability, the marketing, the goal setting, and also the mindset side of things, how it actually feels to run a handmade business. And because you have told me on Instagram that you want to hear about it once a month, I share with you what I've been reading this month. I read a lot every month. In years past, I've read around 100 books a year. This year, I'm already at over 80 in July, so it looks like I'll be reading more, or, because we're expecting foster kids in the next couple months, maybe I've just gotten my whole year's reading out in the first 7 or 8 months. So yeah, this month I've read a lot of novels. So you can find the links to everything I've read in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, or you can head over to taraswiger.com/podcast218 to find links to everything I'm going to talk about. As a reminder, I have Amazon links, which are sponsored links, meaning if you buy it, I earn a couple cents on everything you buy through my links. It's a way for you to support the podcast and support my reading habit. But I also suggest that you buy these at your local independent bookstore if you have one. My favorite is Malaprop's in Asheville. I actually just recently got a book there. I also read a lot of these on my Kindle, but most of these I get at my local library. So go to your local library. I love my librarians. They're some of my favorite people in town. So with that in mind, one of the books that I had actually found through my local library months ago, and I finally read, is Expecting Adam by Martha Beck. So you might know Martha Beck as the most well-known life coach in America. You might know her from Oprah's magazine, or maybe she was on Oprah's show back when that existed. But Martha Beck kind of started in the very beginning of life coaching, like being the first kind of life coach. She has a whole life coach school a lot of my friends have gone to. But this book is really her first book, and it is about the experience of being pregnant and knowing that her son was going to have Down syndrome. So that's who the Adam is, and the expecting part is about her pregnancy and the journey she went through, learning about Down syndrome, realizing that her baby was going to have Down syndrome. She was a Harvard PhD student, as was her husband. Her husband worked 2 weeks out of every month in Asia and went back and forth from Boston to Asia right before she found out she was pregnant. So she went through a lot of the pregnancy with him out of town. They both were PhD students, already had their master's and undergrad from Harvard. They really had bought into the whole idea of intellectual ability and intellectual excellence and success being about how you looked on the outside. Did you seem smart? Did you seem like you had it together? Could you pretend like you knew what was going on in a class when you didn't know what was going on? And so finding out that she was going to have a son who had an intellectual disability, made her question everything in her life. And that's kind of how her life changed. And she doesn't even talk about the life changes as much as she talks about that period of expectation. She also had a lot of kind of weird supernatural things happen to her that made her feel like she wasn't alone, and also that she should keep the baby. And the reason why I read this right now is because I might have mentioned in our episode about how we were deciding to become foster parents that we were open to children with developmental disabilities because of Jay's work. He has a lot of experience. He knows what their lives can be like. And we just have it in our heart to be open to that because a lot of foster parents aren't, so they have a hard time finding homes for those children. And Down syndrome is something Jay's uncle, he had an uncle that had Down syndrome, and so we have always kind of been interested, follow people on Instagram. There's several models on Instagram who are girls with Down syndrome, and this book I didn't read before because I always kind of had the fear that I would read it and then it would stress me out if I became pregnant. But at this point in my life, I felt really ready to read it and learn about it and hear her experience, just kind of absorb what it was she went through during this period of a lot of stress. And it's also super timely because there was a recent article in Slate about how people are the Down syndrome population in Europe, especially Scandinavian countries, is reaching almost zero because of prenatal testing and terminating the pregnancy before the babies are born, because of the information doctors have about the kind of life a child with Down syndrome can expect. And a lot of the information out there is really, really outdated. So a lot of the in the 50s, somebody with Down syndrome, their life expectancy was 16 to 20 years. Now it's 60 years. So there's just a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication out there. And this article in Slate really showed kind of both sides of the conversation, that disability rights activists were saying this is terminating a population of people, and women are making the decision, and doctors are recommending the decision because they're not as educated about what this syndrome actually is and what the life is like for people who live with it. So if that's something that interests you, if you have somebody in your life who has Down syndrome, I totally recommend the book Expecting Adam. If you just want to educate yourself to know a little more about what life would be like or child would be like, Expecting Adam is excellent. If you like Martha Beck, too, I'd read the book, even if you have no other experience with pregnancy or Down syndrome. Read the book if you like Martha Beck. It's interesting to watch her style like unfold. If you've read her later books like Finding Your North Star or Steering by Starlight, this is her first book. It's super interesting. Her next book is about how she left Mormonism, which is also fascinating. It's called Leaving the Saints. The next book I read, actually, that I wanted to talk about is also related to Down syndrome and fostering and adopting, which is what got me started on this kick. It's called Not Always Happy by Carrie Wagner Peck. I actually read this on my Kindle. I think it was super inexpensive on my Kindle. And it is a great little memoir. I read it in just like a day. It's the memoir of deciding to foster and adopt a son that they knew before they got him had Down syndrome. And I think actually they do adoption through foster care. Like when he comes to them, he's already open for adoption, and how they made that decision, and then what life was like in his childhood and how they had to advocate to him in order to get him integrated into the schools, how they had to like advocate for him with his different doctors and therapists, because there's speech therapy and there's physical therapy and there's all different kinds of kind of specialists that come together to create an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, which is something that what Jay deals with in his job is support plans for people who are out of school and into adulthood. And the book is just really, if you like memoirs, if you like parenting memoirs, it's really interesting. It's a different perspective. And like I said, because it's about foster care and adoption, and because we're open to developmentally disabled children, I was interested in reading to see what it would be like. So I really like it. It's called Not Always Happy. It's hilarious. It's very well written and it's very funny. I think it might be self-published, which usually turns me off of memoirs that are self-published because they're typically badly written and badly edited. Just going to generalize right there. And Not Always Happy was really funny and great. And the author, Carrie Wagner Peck, she actually writes for the New York Times. She used to have an article about parenting with the New York Times, like a once a month column, I think. So next book is also about parenting. I promise none of the other books are, but this is called Geek Parenting. I thought you guys would love this. It's so amazing. It's by Steven Seagal and Valia Lupescu. It's gotta be. Inside cover. You know what it says? It takes a starship to raise a child. What? And then look at that great art. If you have been around for any amount of time, you know that my online community for makers and artists is just super supportive and loving, and it's called The Starship. And this book says it takes a starship to raise a child. So I saw this just like in the new, I think it was in the new books at the library, so I picked it up. It's really cute. What it does is it takes geeky stories like Star Wars and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings and like just nerd culture, and boils it down into individual lessons of what you can learn through that nerd culture. So if you're reading Lord of the Rings or Superman, or you're watching Star Trek with Jake and Benjamin Sisko, then this like tells you the lessons that you and your kids can take from that. So not just lessons about parenting, but lessons of what you want to instill in your kids, like resilience and strength and grit and kindness. It's really great. So it's got all different kinds of stories. Oh, also Dungeons and Dragons. And it's just like, here's the thing on Buffy Summers and Rupert Giles. They teach us it takes a Giles to get the most out of Google. Like about how studying is important. So just a bunch of nerdy stories that like the lessons we can take from them in order to be good people. So it's super funny. Me and Jay have had it sitting on our coffee table. We kind of flip through it and talk about the different ones as we open them up. And it's easy to flip through to like the stories you care most about, right? So like here's one. Oh, Coraline and the Other Mother from Neil Gaiman's Coraline. Connor and Angel from Angel, which is a spinoff from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, teaches us sometimes you need to give your teenagers some space. So just really cute little essays. It's funny. We've got it out. All of our friends who come over are like, what? That's awesome. I need that. So everybody's enjoyed flipping through it. The next book I read is Stealing the Show: How Women Are Revolutionizing Television. And this is like the only non-fiction book I read that isn't related to parenting. You can tell what my mind's on. And this is a book that was in my new stacks at the library, like the recently in nonfiction. And it's all about how women as showrunners and creators of television shows have been changing television. So if you at all like television and you like Murphy Brown or The Mindy Project or 30 Rock or Broad City or Girls or Amy Schumer, it's got chapters on basically every important kind of movement in television where women were both the showrunners and the creators, because it's really different. Oh, and of course there's a whole chapter on Shonda and Shondaland. So it's really interesting to see how like women started. Basically Murphy Brown, I think, was the first show ran by women, and then Roseanne, and then it kind of goes from there with women run shows. If you like TV and you like to nerd out about like shows you love, totally recommend it. It's called Stealing the Show: How Women Are Revolutionizing Television by Joy Press. And what a great name is that, Joy Press. I saw that, I was like, she's so lucky. I also read the next 2 volumes in the graphic novel, The Wicked and the Divine. You can buy these as individual comics, which I did for a while, but since Jay's not working at the comic book store, I've just been reading the collection of comics that come out, both volume 5 and volume 6. They're by Kieran Gillen. The Wicked and the Divine is an insane story just for adults. This is not for kids, because it's about basically 13 of the gods of mythology are actually real. And every 20 years they come back and they will live for 2 years. People will love them, worship them, and then they'll die. This sounds crazy. It's crazy. What they are basically in our generation is rock stars. So they give concerts and people come and like worship by like going to a concert. And I just saw somebody on an Instagram post from the Taylor Swift show, and it reminded me of The Wicked and the Divine. So I love it. It's super well written. It's kind of more like a drama, like a soap opera-y drama, but without, it's not over the top the way that soap operas are, or it is over the top in the best way. And it really pulls on mythology. And so if you, like me, nerded out about Egyptian or Roman or Greek mythology when you were a kid, you're going to like The Wicked and the Divine. It calls back to all of that. I also read 2 more books by Alafair Burke. Last month, I talked about a couple of her novels that I read, like The Wife and the Ex. Many of you wrote in and told me you've also been reading Alafair Burke and you totally enjoyed The Wife or the Ex. So I've been reading the next books in her Ellie Hatcher series, which like follows a detective, Ellie Hatcher. And the first one that is 212, and then the next one I read is Never Tell. I think I read Angel's Tip. I talked about that last month. That was the first one in the series, and then 212 and then Never Tell. I might have skipped one, but anyhow, they were totally enjoyable. When I am stressed out or like feeling anxious or feeling anything, depressed, anxious, stressed, I find reading really gripping, like fast-moving fiction is the best way to get out of my own head. So if I'm feeling swirly about work and I can't focus, or I'm feeling swirly about life and getting everything ready for DCS, fiction is just my go-to. So that's why I've read so much fiction in the past couple months, because it gets me out of like my overthinking everything. And it calms down my brain enough so then when I can finally put the book down, which sometimes is hours later, I can think more clearly. I can focus on what I need to focus on because it interrupts that pattern of swirliness. So if you like get into a pattern of swirliness and you just try to buckle down and work, I did that for years and I found it to only amplify my agitation. So now when I get in a swirly space, I pick up a book, which might mean on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., I'm like reading a novel, but I will either set a timer if I feel worried that I'm gonna like read too long or read all day, or I just let myself go knowing that like when I get up for lunch or to refill my coffee cup, I'll put it down and I'll feel like working. So that's why so many novels and not very many business books recently, because I feel like all of the business books that I've read recently are like every other business book I've ever read. I haven't found anything like good and interesting or new. If I have, I've talked about it here on the show. And the second thing is that like sometimes reading business books or listening to business podcasts give you too many ideas. And I just need to work on what I know I need to work on right now. And to get everything ready in my business for the big change of parenting, I have 3 big projects that I know that if I bring like to completion, my business and my brain will be more ready for parental leave. So I don't need to read more business. I don't need to get more ideas about different directions to take my business. I'll be in that place, that space in the future, but I'm not right now. So that's all the fiction. I also read That Kind of Mother by Rumaan Alam. It's a novel that has gotten like a lot of awards and attention. I think it was on my list of novels to read by new novels by people of color. So I think I shared that list here a couple months ago, that I was reading through new novels by people of color as they came out in order to broaden the kind of authors I read. I did not love That Kind of Mother. It's a story of a white woman who hires a black woman to be her nanny when she first gives birth. She's like totally overwhelmed. Over the years of them working together and kind of becoming friends, the black woman gets pregnant and dies during childbirth, and the white employer decides to adopt the baby. It's the best thing. The sister even agrees, that she has an adult sister, agrees it's the best thing for the baby. And then they kind of, it's one of those novels that just kind of follows their life. But I felt like from the very beginning that both women were super underwritten, didn't have tons of personality. And at first I was like, okay, well, it's the new mom. The white woman is home from the hospital and she's overwhelmed with newborn life. And like, okay, so maybe that's why she's so blank, is she's like tired and stressed, but she just stayed blank. And like, even when people in her life would point out to her that she needed to learn more about kind of her own unexplored racism or how race was going to affect her children differently, she just didn't worry about it. And the book kind of ended with her not worrying about it and nothing happening, and basically people of color just telling her she should be more educated and like suggesting or trying to teach her, and her just not being open to it. And that was really the end of the book. So maybe somebody else got something else out of it, but I found that both the women like kind of didn't have interior lives. And then I flipped to the back and I realized that it was written by a man. And not that people can write all different kinds of characters that are different from them, but he didn't, I feel like he got that kind of newborn brain fuzz state, but the mom kind of never came back together as herself. Like she never seemed to, either of the women, or all 3 of the women who are really in it as the book goes on, never got their own personality, their own drive. Like she made a lot of decisions based on what her husband wanted to do, and just like she would just feel a way and tell him that she felt a way, but you wouldn't understand why she felt the way, even though we were in our own head. So I didn't love it. Those are the reasons why. It's not that it was bad or not enjoyable. I was left being like, this wasn't a very deeply written character. And see, I had read that immediately after finishing the next two novels. The first one is Space Opera by Catherine Valenti. This book is hilarious. If you like Douglas Adams, I totally suggest Space Opera. It is funny. It is set in space. There is literally an opera. If you are in Europe and you're an American that loves Eurovision, is that what it's called? The big musical competition show across Europe that every country sends their own person to. Basically, there's a big Eurovision in space, and that's how humans are going to show that we are actually sentient beings. And there's a lot of interesting kind of philosophy about what makes something sentient and what doesn't make it sentient. And like, killing your own kind just over land shows that you're not sentient. And so the aliens who come here and invite us to participate in the Eurovision, the space opera, they are like, we're not entirely sure that you guys are sentient because you kill each other and you kill your resources and you like misuse your resources in a lot of ways that show us you're just kind of like ants down here. So humans have to show our sentience, and we do this by singing a really heartbreaking song. It's funny. That doesn't make it sound funny because it sounds philosophical, but it's super funny. Heartily recommend Space Opera by Catherine Valenti. I heard about it actually from Vlogbrothers. Hank Green on Vlogbrothers suggested it. I'm going to link up Vlogbrothers. If you watch this on YouTube and you don't watch Vlogbrothers, I don't know what's wrong. Go watch Vlogbrothers. And then right after Space Opera, I read An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. Tayari Jones, yes. So she also wrote The Sparrow, which I read, or Silver Sparrow. I read a couple years ago and loved it. So I was super looking forward to An American Marriage coming out. And after reading An American Marriage, which goes back and forth between showing the perspective of a wife and a husband, crazy things happen to them in their life, and that impacts their marriage in a real way. And kind of you think it's going to go one way and then it goes another way. And it's a real beautiful character study and a real heartfelt study of what it feels like to try to be in a relationship with somebody. And I think that reading that and then the very next day reading That Kind of Mother is what made me not enjoy That Kind of Mother as much. Maybe if I had read That Kind of Mother after I'd read a bunch of like just quick fiction or mystery like thrillers, maybe I would have liked it better. But An American Marriage is so well written, and you so feel like you're living in the head and the heart of these people that are narrating it. It's just heartbreaking and beautiful, and like life, it's like doesn't all turn out the way you think it's going to turn out. So that is what I read this month. Actually, I am reading, and by the end of the month, by the time you listen to this, I will have finished the Chrissy Metz book, This Is Me, Loving Who You Are Today. This, our listeners of my podcast, Essential Enthusiasm, voted that Jolie and I read this as our book club pick. So we're going to be talking about this the week that this podcast comes out, that you're listening to me right now on Wednesday. Our episode where we talk about This Is Me, or rather, yeah, This Is Me, that will come out this Friday. So if you aren't yet listening to Essential Enthusiasm, search it up in iTunes. It's also on my YouTube. It's in whatever podcast app you're listening to, and you can hear a conversation about This Is Me. We recently had a really great conversation about the book Dietland and body image and body acceptance, and I've gotten a lot of feedback that our listeners loved that. So if you're not yet listening, go find us there. You can also watch us live each week before the show comes out. We record it, we live stream it in the Facebook group, Take Care of Yourself with Tara and Jolie. So you can join us over there if you're interested in taking care of yourself while you work on your business. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. I want to hear what you're reading. So please either leave a comment on YouTube or come over to Instagram. I don't have the comments on my blog turned on. Some people ask about that, but it just gets filled up with spam. So come talk to me on Instagram. I'm at Tara Swiger. I want to hear what you're reading. Take a picture of what you're reading. Use the hashtag #ExploreYourEnthusiasm and be sure to tag me and I will come see what you're reading. Add things to my to read list. You can find links to all of the books that I talked about at taraswiger.com/podcast218. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.